For the last couple hundred years, there's been one idea that has shaped our world more than pretty much anything else. It's an idea that started wars, it's created entire countries, and it's literally redrawn the map of the globe. And that idea is nationalism. It's a force so powerful we kind of just take it for granted, but it's also one of the most complex and, honestly, misunderstood concepts in politics. So, let's get into it.
Just think about it for a second. Really, what makes you part of a nation? Is it your passport? The flag you might cheer for during the Olympics? We all have this gut feeling, right? We know what a nation is. But the moment you try to pin down a really precise definition, well, things get surprisingly tricky. And this brilliant idea from the political scientist Benedict Anderson really gets to the heart of it. See, a nation isn't something you can actually touch or see. You're never going to meet all of your fellow citizens, not even a fraction of them. Instead, it's a mental image. It's the shared belief that you are all part of the same group. It's something we build together, in our minds.
So, this brings us to a core paradox. We live in a world that is completely divided up into nations. But figuring out what a nation actually is, well, that's been a source of just endless debate. It's this strange mix of objective facts and subjective feelings, of culture and politics all rolled into one. Okay, so here's the crucial part, this two-part definition. On one hand, yeah, you've got the cultural stuff, things like a common language or religion or a shared history. But on the other hand, and this is so important, you have the political and psychological belief. A group of people who simply see themselves as a natural community, one that deserves to govern itself. And the case of Switzerland just illustrates this perfectly. I mean, if nations were only about having one language or one religion, Switzerland shouldn't even exist. It's got 3 major languages, and it's split between Catholics and Protestants. So why does it work? It works because the Swiss people believe they are a nation. They're united by a common history and a shared political will. That shared belief, it turns out, is way more powerful than any objective cultural marker. This leads us to 2 main ways of thinking about how nations get formed. You can almost think of them as 2 different recipes for creating that feeling of national belonging. One recipe is all about culture, and the other is all about civic ideals. Now, what's really interesting here is the fundamental difference in where they focus. Cultural nationalism, that's all about a shared past. Think language, ethnicity, ancient stories. It's about these deep, organic roots. Civic nationalism, though, is about a shared future. It's built on a commitment to common political ideas, to laws and values, and it doesn't matter what your background is. So the cultural recipe was really championed by thinkers like Johann Gottfried Herder. He had this idea that every nation had a unique spirit of the people, or Volksgeist. And he thought you could find this spirit in its language, its folk songs, its old myths. For Herder, a nation was this natural, almost living thing that grew organically over centuries. The civic model, on the other hand, comes from a totally different place, the Enlightenment and the French Revolution. The idea here wasn't that you were born into a nation, but that you chose to be a part of it. The people of France were no longer just subjects of a king, they were citizens, and they were united by these revolutionary ideals: liberty, equality, fraternity. The nation was a political project built on shared principles. But the civic model has its limits. Just look at Yugoslavia. For decades, it tried to build this unified civic identity for all its diverse people: Serbs, Croats, Bosnians, and others. But when the state finally collapsed in the 1990s, those deeper, older, cultural loyalties just exploded to the surface, and it led to a brutal civil war. It's a really sobering reminder that these imagined communities are both incredibly powerful and sometimes incredibly fragile. So how do these 2 ideas, the cultural and the civic, actually play out in the real world? Well, nationalism isn't just one single ideology. It's more like a chameleon, you know? It changes its color depending on the political tradition it attaches itself to. It can be progressive or reactionary. It can be liberating or totally oppressive. We can basically break this down into 4 main political phases. Each one takes that core idea of the nation and just uses it for very different and often completely contradictory political goals. Okay, first up, you've got liberal nationalism. This is kind of the optimistic version. It takes the civic idea that all people deserve rights and applies it to the cultural idea of the nation. It basically argues that every distinct nation deserves its own state. The ultimate goal here was a world of equal democratic nations, all living together in harmony. Then there's conservative nationalism, which leans way more heavily on that cultural recipe. This version isn't so much about creating new states as it is about protecting the ones that already exist. It sees the nation as this organic thing, bound by a shared history, and its main goal is to defend that national culture from what it sees as threats, whether they're internal or external.
And now we get to the darker side, expansionist nationalism. This is what happens when cultural nationalism gets twisted into a doctrine of superiority. It takes that idea of a unique national spirit and perverts it into chauvinism, this irrational belief that your nation is just better and is destined to dominate others. This is the ideology that fueled imperialism and world wars. But nationalism can also be a profoundly liberating force. Anti-colonial nationalism created this powerful hybrid. It used the civic language of its liberal opponents, the right to freedom and self-determination, but it fueled its struggle with a rediscovery of deep cultural pride. In a way, it turned the colonizers' own ideas right back against them. So this brings us to the big question for our time. For 200 years, the nation-state has been the main character on the world stage. But is its story coming to an end? I mean, is a world beyond nations even possible? Well, if you think the nation-state is history, this number should probably make you stop and think. Over 100 new countries have been born in just the last 60 years or so, and almost every single one of them was founded on that principle of national self-determination. The desire for a nation to have its own state is still an incredibly powerful political force. And this gets us to the great paradox of our time. On one side, you have forces like globalization, the internet. They're erasing borders and connecting us in ways we never thought possible. But on the other side, that very same interconnectedness seems to push people to cling even more tightly to their national identity for a sense of belonging, of security. It is a fundamental tension that is absolutely going to define our future. So, we're left with this final thought. Nationalism has been a bridge, uniting people to demand their liberty and throw off oppression. And it has been a barrier, building walls of hatred and fueling terrible conflict. In a world that seems to be coming together and pulling apart all at the same time, the question for all of us is, which one will it be next?